If you have spent time with us on webinars in the past here at TBR, there are going to be two things that are a little bit different today. The first one is we're only going to present for about 20 minutes. We're going to walk through some of the content, some of the research, some of the analysis we've been doing over the last year plus. But we want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. We want to leave plenty of time for more interaction. And we're probably actually going to end up asking each other questions by the time we wrap this up. So that's the first thing that's going to be different. The second thing that hopefully is going to be different is I'm going to speak more slowly. We were doing a webinar earlier this week for one of our clients, for Ericsson, and we do that fairly frequently for some of our clients where we tailor a webinar specifically for them and their questions. And I managed to go through the introductions and what we were going to cover and get the first part of it rolling all in 3 minutes. And that's ridiculous. So I'm going to try to speak more slowly so that everybody can understand what I'm saying, not have to go back and listen to the replay. What are we going to cover today? So first, we're going to talk about use cases and helping vendors scale adoption of generative AI. And I'll say Gen AI from now on. And I'll talk about how much we use that interchangeably with AI, with artificial intelligence itself. We're going to talk about multi-party alliances. We're going to talk about co-branded facilities. We're going to talk about digital transformation. And then Boz and I each have a few questions that we're going to ask each other about what's happening in the broader generative AI and also digital transformation space. And I want to say this entire webinar, this whole presentation really is based on the predictions documents that we released at the end of last year. So as Haley mentioned, there'll be some links you can go to find those documents. A lot of what we're going to be talking about is based on things that we were thinking at the end of last year. And then, of course, we're 18 days into this year. So it's a lot of what we've been hearing already as the year has gotten going. So there's the two of us. Now you have our email addresses. You can reach out to us whenever you like. So what are we talking about when we talk about Gen AI? And it's just, we were talking just before this webinar started about how this topic, I know it didn't not exist a year ago, but a year ago it was not the thing that we were all consumed with. Now it's something that we have a conversation about multiple times every day, and every single client call, every single bit of research now seems to include Gen AI. Really critically important to understand from our perspective is what we wrote in our market landscape published on December 1st of last year. The final note at the bottom, all of this stuff, automation, neural processing unit, natural language processing, large language models, all super important, all part of the generative AI market landscape, all part of what we talk about every day. But we at Technology Business Research, I'm talking too fast, are focused on the business of technology. We're not trying to explain LLMs. We're not trying to explain the intricacies of hallucinations and all that. What we're trying to talk about is how is generative AI having an impact on the business models of the companies in the technology ecosystem. So that's where we're coming from. And let's dive into a couple of the big topics today. So how are more defined use cases going to help scale adoption? What we've heard repeatedly over the last year has been the way that clients and vendors, technology vendors in the Gen AI space talk about use cases is they talk about them in tiers or in different sort of buckets. So the easiest thing first is that mundane stuff. And that's where a lot of attention went to AI, generative AI about 6 months ago, 9 months ago, was how do I get rid of this simple, easy tasks? Like if it can be automated, then throw Gen AI at it. A little bit of an echo of robotic process automation there, and we can talk about what that means. Then those things were things like content creation, things like sales automation, the sort of the easy, low risk tasks, things that enterprises could pick up and do without, again, putting a big risk to the enterprise or to their operations, or honestly even to their data. That was the easy one. Then the second thing, the second bucket or the second tier really gets into more productivity. It gets into enterprise risk. It gets into, you think about your broader applications across an enterprise like SAP, for example, and how can you apply generative AI in that space and what would that look like? Now there's all sorts of implications about that. I'll get to that in a second, but what we're talking about there is that middle tier of generative AI cases. And then, of course, the last part is, the last tier of it is really how do you get your business to talk back to you? What are the sort of the way out there use cases around generative AI? Those are all speculative and all a lot of talk right now. Nobody's actually scaling any of that up. And in fact, we're not even seeing a lot of scaling in that middle term, that middle bucket right now, just because of the challenges around the risk and the cost. And that's the second part of this, or the second bullet here, which is the pressure to do the pressure and the hype and the interest around generative AI is being driven by both the executive level, by the C-suite. It's also being driven by the popularity of generative AI, the ubiquitousness of it. There's not a single company, it seems, out there that doesn't tell you that their service or their solution doesn't include generative AI. But just because it's popular and just because you're getting pressure to adopt doesn't get rid of the risks, and it doesn't get rid of the costs. And the cost part of that equation is really important for the technology companies that we're talking about, because that's where they're either making money by charging a premium, or that's where they're running into their clients saying, hey, we're not going to pay more just because you slap Gen AI on the label. So before we go to industries and horizontals, Boss, thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, a couple of areas, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Happy New Year to everyone on the call. So a couple of click downs maybe, just to start on the top. The tiered use cases that we have heard from the enterprises, the way they think about developing those use cases and where they're placing their bets right now. That certainly creates some implications for the vendors on the vendor side of the house, thinking about what does that mean? How do you price your solutions? How do you start thinking about your go-to-market strategy? So tiered pricing, they'll probably command some tiered pricing in terms of developing those models. You'll command a different approach to the solutions in terms of competing for services, but also competing for the actual solutions that are being developed and looking broadly outside your traditional competitive set and including some of the startups. In a recent conversation with an enterprise executive, they were given a great example of how they were actually optimizing their marketing department in that regards, and they were actually but essentially reducing the marketing department's budget about 50% as a result of getting a customer experience AI solution that was basically optimizing a lot of that function in the front end. They were seeing the immediate savings. So those pointed solutions are driving some immediate results. But again, those are more of a mundane task, something that's a low-hanging fruit in the tier. And those tiered pricing will come with tiered solutions. But obviously, in the bigger picture, as we're thinking about the phase 2 and phase 3 of those use cases, will drive some different need for a greater enterprise discussions, which will necessitate a better collaboration among the vendors that are supporting the enterprise, because obviously those GenAI solutions have to be connected with the existing IT systems, and we already know that the systems are a mess in the first place, and the GenAI is pretty complex, so it will require some more hand-holding than just throwing the solution for a particular domain. So there's the opportunity for the larger vendors to make the buck, essentially, at the end of the day, right? From an industry perspective, and you're thinking about some of the pressures, what we're seeing is there are a couple of ways to think about it, and kind of drawing some parallels with the digital transformation. A lot of the focus initially was, and the investment started at the customer experience side. All the B2C industries we saw before, and we're seeing right now jumping on those investments and starting to develop those use cases. And that's where we're seeing some of the earlier use cases and proof points from the vendor side as well, from the buyer side. On the other side, the B2B and more highly regulated industries, those a little bit slower to move, but they're definitely some greater implications of how vendors actually navigate those industries from a regulatory perspective. We'll touch base on that later, but also thinking about how they manage the data, raising questions about data security, data privacy. Do you want to move data from the cloud to on-prem and vice versa? And how do you actually think about that as you're building those models? So there's a lot of, in a way, it's a wild, wild west in a sense of like use cases over the map, right? It's over the map from discussions, from investments. Buyers are starting to get a little bit more sober view and starting to, again, those tiered priorities are driving different investments. They are putting some different requirements from the vendor side as well. One big piece here, as we're thinking about how it all evolves, is, and what we're starting to hear is that GenAI should not be treated as a SaaS, just another SaaS solution. That's a big piece. And rather than just being, and template it and throw it into into an enterprise and sold as a SaaS solution, because every model will be fed by the enterprise data. So I think that's an important piece to think as you're building those use cases, as vendors are going to market, as they are developing a different strategy. Again, you can use the APIs to connect the different pieces of the different models even within an organization, but using some templates and make that connectivity easier. But in the first place, from a go-to-market perspective, it's less about being a SaaS solution, but a little bit more of a data-specific, organization-specific use cases.
Yeah, and I think two of the lessons we've taken away about what successful use cases and successful use cases going to scale look like are actually perfect echoes of what we saw with digital transformation, where if you had a cool technology that was great, but if you couldn't understand what your clients' actual needs were and actual budget were, then you weren't going to get anywhere. And then the second part is that the horizontal and industry, if you understand the industry, but you understand your horizontal, the technology, the solution you're bringing, because you mentioned marketing, was every company has a marketing department. That doesn't mean that your GenAI solution around marketing is necessarily going to be useful to every single marketing organization across every single company. So again, it gets back to, if you want your use case to scale, you actually have to know what your clients' needs are, and then you have to know what their budget is. That gets to the tiering part.
Yeah, one more piece here on that last component, about especially on the industry side. This is something that we are starting to look into 2024 and beyond, is industry-specific models, right? Versus the just organizational enterprise-wide models, domain-specific models, those custom models that we just hinted a moment ago. That'll be important to think as you are going to market and you're trying to engage with the clients along the way from a GenAI perspective.
Yeah, and that gets to data, and that's another lesson that we learned with the whole digital transformation hype for a while. No matter how much you wanted to do digital transformation, if your data environment wasn't good.
Yep.
I had to catch myself there when I really wanted to say.
Yep.
All right, let's move on.
Yep.
Multi-party alliances, co-branding facilities, GenAI sort of ending this concept of end-to-end, and how where we are in the technology ecosystem has changed considerably because, or maybe accelerated by, the pandemic. But no doubt, no question to us that all of the vendors that we cover, ranging from in our practice, the McKinseys and the Wipros of the world, but then within TBR we also cover Amazon, we cover the devices companies, infrastructure companies, everybody. So no doubt over the last few years, the way that companies in that everybody in the technology ecosystem space has partnered, has gone to market together, has changed. Then you throw GenAI on top of it, and it reinforces this idea that no company can bring end-to-end services or end-to-end technology. Every single company in the technology space that's trying to provide GenAI as part of their solution, as part of their services, is going to rely on an ecosystem partner. And so what we've heard again over the last year, repeatedly from buyers, from companies, from everybody in between, is that the companies that are more adept at going to market with their partners are the ones that are more successful. And so what does more adept actually mean? It means understanding what your partner brings to your client, being able to articulate why your client should be working not just with you, you got that story already, but why your client should be working with your technology partner or with your services partner. And so when you add GenAI on top of all that, when you add the hype, and when you add all the excitement around the possibility that GenAI brings, automatically you're making it a more difficult conversation, or at least you need to be able to present the nuance of why this particular partner better than before. Boz?
Yeah, and to that point, I was just thinking about what we're starting to see and hear from the vendor side and from the buyer side, how they are actually reacting to a model, what we are calling like the rise of the superpowers, so to speak. And it's in a way of thinking of usually the partnerships are two-dimensional, right? You have a technology and services, you have a software, you have a channel partner kind of strategy, right? Most of us are aware of. But we start to see like a 3- and 4-way partnerships as a way to think through how vendors are trying to go to market, and creating almost like a preferred partnership setup. Not exclusive, because nobody wants to say I'm exclusive to partner A versus partner B, but it's more of a preferred way of going to market. And in that, in a way, certainly will help to bring that trusted relationship component along the way as those multi-party relationships go to market. Because if you know that your data is secure and stored well on Azure, and you trust the EY, for example, will bring in, or PwC will bring in the management consulting component that comes and along with the governance of the model, understanding the risk that comes along with it. And then you know that you have the engineering staff from Infosys that have the really heavy duty engineering background. You have that trust now, being in place, and maybe you can bring in the SAP in that mix where because the GenAI, we said that phase 3 will be connecting to the ERPs and kind of the HCMs and the back office applications. So GenAI will really impacting the productivity of not just the everyday productivity, but actually the IT operations, and then most importantly, like the clients, the end customers, essentially. So when you start having like those 3-4-way partnerships, and each one of those bringing the respected strength to the discussion, it's something that buyers are not opposed to. They certainly see it as more of a testing at this point. GenAI certainly could test those relationships even further from an IT architecture standpoint, from a business standpoint, from a governance, from a pricing model. Requires a lot more accountability and trust. We fully recognize that this is not just one and done, and it's a perfect model. It's a perfect model on paper, but it's much harder to on execution side, because as Patrick pointed, you have to know your partners' portfolio, you have to know your partners' strategies and strengths. So it takes a little bit more education, a little bit more training, and really trusting the ecosystem. So as an opportunity there to elevate that that trust to the next degree. Part of it could come from democratization and access to tools. Part of it could come from just the training and just the way as a go-to-market strategy can resonate with clients. Maybe starting with a small business unit specific, and those domain models that I mentioned a moment ago could be a good use case, because boiling the ocean at the enterprise level with 3-4-way partnership might be a little more challenging when there's certainly an ongoing digital transformation program already in motion. But if you focus on maybe those business unit specific issues, might be a little bit easier to manage. Plus, the budgets are often managed through those business unit departments.
Right, and that's a great place to wrap that up, because again, the budgets. We're talking about what clients actually want to spend money on, or willing to spend money on, have money to spend on. And while it's always been true that the multi-vendor alliances, the multi-party alliances are challenging, that buyers are looking for them more now is that catalyst to actually make more of them happen more frequently. So, all right, so let's move on here. I promised 20 minutes. I'm probably gonna go over a little bit. This I wanted to show everyone because this is our AI and GenAI market landscape that we released again December 1st of last year. You can see it covers, I covered up a little bit of it here on the left, but that table of content shows you that we're covering professional services, cloud and software, IT infrastructure, devices, and telecoms. Those are all the companies that are mentioned in the report. You can see in the middle there. Under professional services, you can see that we look at the investments that have been made, training that's being done, how they're partnering. We're looking at the offerings and the use cases. We're looking at where things stand now and what the expectations are around GenAI. And then you can see a slide on the right. That's just an example of what some of the research looks like. And now we're going to turn to something we haven't done before, but why not? New year. Let's try something new. These are the questions that Boz and I have both been asking ourselves and each other when we have been thinking about and talking about generative AI. So I'll go first and I'll ask Boz his questions. What is it that GenAI regulations are going to mean to vendors' business models?
Yeah, so one thing, and I think I brought up a moment in the beginning of the presentation when I was looking at the different industries and how actually maybe the B2C is a little bit more further along in terms of adoption, and the B2B and the more highly regulated industries a little bit slower to think. But I think there's a reason for that, and not think, but slower to adopt and invest in GenAI technologies. One of the reasons for that is exactly that, the regulations. But what we're starting to hear and see is regulating bodies talking about a little bit more developing the guardrails around AI and GenAI as an example, and thinking about how the vendors will react to it. It boils back down to the ecosystem, boils back down to investments in local resources, boils down to understanding, who does do what well, essentially, because the big four, a good example of, vendors that have really strong governance, risk, and compliance, but you also have the hyperscalers with the data hosting and data management side. You have also the systems integrators and the managed services providers that are really, the shepherds of that data, essentially, and making sure that this data it flows the way it's supposed to be, and there's no leakage over where it's not going to be. So from a regulatory perspective, I think it's going to be actually may seem a little bit of a bump along the way, but actually a better bump than maybe has done in the past for other technologies when it comes to regulations. Obviously, regulations always drive consulting, but it's also thinking about the opportunity for the industry models, the domain models, and even geo-specific large language models because of those regulations. So there could be models that have to be developed and managed in a particular country or particular region, and that's something that creates more opportunities. And just trying to put some, in a way of like it's an opportunity for the vendors to keep them on their toes, but it's a good way, in a good way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think one of the things that it's easy to say. All these things happened in the past and were badly regulated, or there wasn't enough regulation around data privacy, with social media and all that. That doesn't mean that regulators can't learn some lessons and start to apply them. So, all right, that's the first one. I do want to mention for folks listening out there, we have started to get some questions in the Q&A box. Go ahead and put those in. We will absolutely get to those actually pretty shortly. Next one for you, Boz. How will vendors prepare for GenAI infused revenue commoditization? Nobody likes that word.
No, nobody does. But I think many in the IT service space are realizing that very quickly, actually, and they're just trying to look into their staffing models, understanding what it means in the long term and how they should be positioning their value proposition. For years, IT services vendors, that labor arbitrage go-to-market has worked well. The offshore model has worked well, and I think will continue to work well. But we're starting to see kind of like the shave off of headcount and trying to decrease the headcount growth from the spike as a result of the pandemic, driven growth in the 2021, 2022. Now we're starting to see how vendors are starting to calibrate their staffing pyramids, much more focused on upskilling existing talent. I wouldn't say that this headcount deceleration is largely because of GenAI today. It's mostly because the overall demand for IT services and cloud has slowed down. But it could be like misinterpreted sometimes. But maybe it's in a way of a preparation of what may come as a result of GenAI, and it's a good way. It's a good way to test those kind of models with less people doing more and having those technologies, because it's something that IT services vendors have been trying for years. You mentioned RPA earlier. Everyone's been using automation for a while. From a service delivery, from internal process management. But nobody has achieved really a sustainable non-linear revenue growth model. So the calibration of the headcount that many vendors are experiencing right now is because of the slowing demand, less so because of GenAI specifically and being taking jobs away. But it's in a good test bed for the vendors for what's coming.
Yeah, excellent. And I mean, the RPA story, we could go off on a long tangent about that, but we'll leave it as, we've written about it. So if you really want to know, you can look up Boz Christoph RPA and you can see what he thinks. All right. Now, you want me to ask myself my questions?
It doesn't matter. I'll start with the first one. So thinking about the winning GenAI strategies, so in consultancies. So what's the winning strategy for the consultancy? And just go ahead.
I think so. When I think about this, what is GenAI going to mean to the consulting business model? And I think back to a conversation that we had with one of the big four firms. I'm just going to leave it at that. Last fall, when we were talking about the consulting business model fundamentally being hire good people and throw them at a problem. And the response was, yeah, that's true, but we think we hire good listeners, because it's the ability to listen well and then to understand what the problems are and then approach them that makes all the difference. I'm not sure GenAI changes that, because if anything, what we're learning with GenAI is how managing it, getting it to actually do what you want it to do, understanding where the risks not only are, but sort of where the landmines are. I mean, not just the things that could go wrong, but the things that are going to go wrong, that you are going to step on, are probably the most important parts of understanding how GenAI is actually going to have an influence on your business, how it's actually going to change your enterprise. So for consultancies to be able to say, we're using generative AI as part of our business model, I think what they're going to end up saying is really, we're using it to listen better. We're using it to find problems, maybe more efficiently, but probably more find problems that are more deeply rooted, and to be able to pull them out. So in terms of the business model itself for consulting, yeah, it's going to have an impact. You're going to probably need fewer people. There may be, fewer people within the consulting space. The big four firms may actually see fewer consultants because they'll be able to do more with GenAI. But those consultants that are going to be there are going to have to be really well adept at being able to speak to artificial intelligence, speak to the business and have it speak back to them, and listen, and be able to listen to what's coming out of it.
Yeah, a lot more knowledge management.
More knowledge management, which has traditionally been, again, I could get on a soapbox about knowledge management, but bottom line is it's underfunded, it's under cared about. I guess that's part of underfunded. It's often badly managed, and it's often one of those things that and not only is it critical inside an organization, but then knowledge management across an alliance ecosystem is critical too. All right.
I want to end the presentation on a grim note here, but
yes.
I'll ask the question regardless since you have it there. What's your view on the procurement as a result of GenAI? Hopefully, the answer is a little bit more optimistic.
Well, it is, because if you had asked me this question, and when we started thinking about this 9 months ago, the answer was yeah, and good riddance. Like, procurement was going to go away, GenAI was going to kill it. We have over the course of the summer and last fall really gotten a better understanding of how GenAI is going to be a complement to what procurement does. It's going to ratchet up the pressure on providers, so across any enterprise or alliance partners, to prove their worth. Because it's one thing if you try and game the system with procurement being run by people, it's a lot different when you try and game the system if procurement is being run by GenAI. So I think there's going to be a shift in procurement. I don't think we're going to see procurement become a part of the business the way IT has. I don't think we're going to see like our procurement is part of, is a growth engine for us or anything like that. Where it's not going to stop being the cost center that it is, but I think it is going to change the way that procurement is done. And it's going to make the burden on the burden around being a good provider, being a good alliance partner is going to be increased because of the tools that procurement offices are going to have. GenAI enabled tools that procurement offices are going to have. So it's it's going to change. It's not going to go away.
Well, change is better than going away.
Change is better than going away.
That's good.
Yes, so we've made some progress on that. All right, I wanted to share these before we go to the Q&A. I just wanted to share these. These are the trend and drivers and result from our digital transformation predictions document. Obviously, while digital transformation itself and the technology space is broader than just generative AI is what all we've been talking about so much over the last year. So we felt, we really wanted to touch on that and dive deep on that today. But here you can see, I mean, we're already thinking about outcomes-based pricing within generative AI. And then this next slide, we're thinking about, Boz mentioned regulation. We're thinking about how regulatory bodies are going to have an impact, and in particular, how the big four firms are probably going to be the ones that benefit the most from that because of their governance, risk, and compliance background heritage. This is where you can find all this stuff. As Haley has on here, the Spotlight report in the webinar console, you can download it. You can take a look at our AI and generative AI market landscape. We also have a lot coming up this year. This is just a sample of the things that are going to be published over the next few months from TBR. Again, this is kind of nice because it shows we've got the IT infrastructure strategy, customer research, we have telecom AI market landscape. We're looking at cloud AI market landscape. Out within our practice, IT services and professional services, we issue quarterly reports on all the vendors that we cover, and every single one of our reports on each individual vendor includes a look at their AI strategy or their generative AI strategy, and their investments and their training and their go-to-market and everything you would want to know about each individual vendor. Because again, that's how we come to look at the market, is by looking at individual vendors. So with that, let's take this question that came in. It says, From the C-suite perspective, how do they select a trusted advisor from their relationships with a management consultant, systems integrator, or IT vendor who is best able to provide informed AI use case info and guidance? Boz, you want to go first?
Oh, right. How they select vendors, trusted vendors. Okay. Well, what we have seen, and it's not surprise probably, and we hinted during the presentation, most enterprises turn over to existing vendors. That has been the mantra. So it's less about having a GenAI specific offering today, more about what have you done for me in the last 2, 3, 5, 10 years, 15 years, as long as the relationships have been. So that has been the easier, less risky kind of a approach from the buyer side, turning over to existing relationship, trusted relationships that they know, but relationships that actually know what they've been executed to vendors that have stayed within their own swim lane, and less so about vendors that have tried to push the envelope in areas that may not have proven capabilities. So the typical attributes that come along, industry knowledge, understanding the IT infrastructure, the partner ecosystem play we mentioned, how well you play with everybody else in the sandbox of my enterprise. Those are kind of like a price to value. Price continues to be a factor there. I mean, how much am I getting back? We see the use case of Microsoft and Copilot certainly dominating the mind share and wallet share, 12, 14 months into the whole GenAI frenzy, but we're starting to see and hearing buyers trying to think beyond what else is out there, not just Copilot. I mean, any other models, we know AWS with Anthropic and Google Gemini, but then thinking about beyond that, those custom models, those domain-specific models, is where we're going to start seeing really some of the SIs and management consultancies shine in terms of like how much they actually can do well with GenAI versus broader, just the messaging perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to come at this question a little bit in a different way, and that's I get the coming at it from the C-suite perspective. How does the C-suite make a choice? But when you think about the management consultancies, the SIs, systems integrators, and other IT vendors, so I'm going to take that to mean like the hyperscalers and software players, they, meaning the management consultancies, the SIs, and the hyperscalers, let's say, all have very different relationships with the C-suite, and in fact, maybe not even talking to the C-suite. And what's fascinating about GenAI is, unlike almost every other technology we've looked at over the last 20 years, the demand is coming from both the top and the bottom. So the really tuned in person at a lower level within an enterprise, or more inexperienced level in an enterprise, is still having an impact on how and when and what ways they're using GenAI. But the demand and the interest and the hype might be popularized across an entire enterprise, but of course the budget's still coming from the C-suite. What's critical is it is the management consultancies that are talking to the C-suite. Typically your IT services, your GSIs are not. Typically your hyperscalers are not. If they are, what's critical there is that you know who it is that they're talking to. And by you, I mean somebody else within the ecosystem. So if you're one of the management consultancies and you understand that you're working with an enterprise that's already an AWS shop, or better, already a Microsoft shop, then you already know that the C-suite's going to be leaning towards Microsoft. So their whole decision making around who and how and where they go with GenAI is going to be deeply influenced by that. If you are one of the GSIs and you want to be making your GenAI pitch, and you know it's the C-suite that's making that decision on what they're going to buy, you need to be partnered with a big four firm or a management consultancy. You need to be able to get and this gets back to what I was saying before, you need to be able to be sure that PwC knows how to explain what it is that makes you different. And if you're not confident that PwC can tell the difference between what you're doing and what your competitors are doing, that's where you're going to be missing out. And so it's not necessarily that the C-suite is making a decision that's not in your favor. It's the C-suite isn't being informed on how to make a decision that would be more in your favor. I know I'm kind of coming at it in a weird way, but I read that question. That's exactly what came to mind. All right, we are over time. We're supposed to be done at 35 minutes. We're at 36. Couple other questions in the queue. We'll have to email them and respond to them later. But I appreciate everybody who joined. If you have other questions, you now have our email addresses. Let me pull up the last slide, I guess. Oh, it doesn't have our email addresses on. Is there one more? Next steps. There we go. If you have other questions, please send them. We are going to continue to be writing and talking about this all the time. I'll be doing a Friday morning 5 on LinkedIn tomorrow. Might even have a special guest appearance, so please tune in for that. Haley, anything else we need to say? Boz, anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot of ground today. Definitely, if 2023 was busy, I think 2024 will be even busier on the GenAI front.
All right, so I'm going to extend this just a little bit more. I know we're over time. I can't help it. Boz, I got to ask you, 2 years from now, are we still going to be talking about GenAI the way we're talking about it now?
No.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, no, if it's going to become more ubiquitous. It's going to become more embedded into everything we do. It won't be the way we talk about it. Today is a lot about unknown, a lot about education, about skilling. It'll be a little bit more about, scaling deployments and that phase 2, phase 3 of those tiered, use cases we talked in the beginning is how do I make my SAP S4 running a little more efficiently with the GenAI? So it'll be a little bit of conversation, I'm sure we're going to talk about governance. I'm sure we're going to talk about industry knowledge. That will never end because there's still a lot of vendors, a lot of buyers, I should say, out there, enterprises that are so far behind on the digital transformation. So I'm sure that will be the kind of a wave that maybe will be some of the conversations of those, but we'll be moving a little bit further along and the ones that are actually a little bit more mature. Quantum for GenAI, I would not exclude that to be part of the conversation in a couple of years. We're starting to see some early signs of that.
Well, I can be honest. I mean, I've done everything I can to understand large language models and hallucinations, but I cannot understand quantum. So I can guarantee you in 2 years, I will not be chatting about quantum on a GenAI or any other kind of webinar. Excellent. Thanks so much, Boz. Thank you, Hayden.